Okay, we're trying a somewhat less high resolution version. We'll see if this works a little better from my point of view. And for here, we're going to be looking at the Lesser Wrath part of the War of the Hats. Again, this is the Ghost of Charles XII is going to be the integrated pair of the two games together. This along with Summer Scralla. You probably should at least watch part of the Summer Scralla video before going to this to get some idea of what I'm attempting here. But this is a separate standalone game which uses the Lace Wars system for land combat, basically. Now, in this particular case, let's take a look at what we have. We have a map, and the first thing you'll notice is there kind of aren't hexes. What there are is little dots, okay? But there are hex-like shapes between the little dots, so it's kind of a nice visual appearance. You can look at it and you don't see this annoying hex distortion. And in fact, the map actually pushes some of the dots around a little bit to make that hex distortion less of an issue. So the center of land hexes is going to be on land rather than, you know, maybe being skewed out at sea or something. So there's a little bit of distortion there to make it a more attractive thing. And again, also, similar to, what is it, the Clash of Arms type games, Battles of the Age of Reason, as well as some of the Labata system. Your military units, and I'm no fan of this, but they're going to have their, regimental uniform in play on the counters. For me, that makes it just difficult to discern things, but I understand some people really love that kind of appearance. You also have pictures on the various counters. Now, here's one of the issues. Let me see if we can zoom in on one of these and see. So that's sort of readable with the camera zoomed in, okay? But this is about how my eyes see it, okay? These counters are very, it requires almost looking under a magnifying glass to read them. And it's actually easier with the camera than it is without. I found it very difficult, especially when the light wasn't absolutely perfect, to read or discern these counters. To some extent, that's not terribly important. The important information during play is all very heavily, it's the stuff that in large print. But when you're setting up, especially the first time you're facing the game, it's sometimes hard to figure out what's what. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I seem to have lost a counter. I'm missing one of these little things, but I definitely had it originally. And no, it's not that one over there. That's accounted for. I just seem to have dropped it out of the box or something, and it's got to be around here somewhere. I don't know what happened to it. It may be lodged in the board, actually, because it's taped together. And again, one of these print and play, and you can see the effect of print and play on my technical abilities. Again, this is the. You see I kind of left a little bit here, and I don't have any way of trimming that easily. I'm using a scissors. This is the effect of trying to construct your own game, even with the exalted version that is already mostly assembled and comes with some nicer pieces and everything. So you've got this main board. You've also got this Northern Front display, which is an optional rule, which I'll be playing with, which handles the potential for the Russians to advance deeper into Finland, and they historically did, to some extent at least. You also have Sweden off map here. The units themselves have some information on them. I didn't go too much into the units on the other one. I'm trying to do that. They have a quality, which is their base quality. Their movement allowance is on there as well. They'll be assembled again onto little charts. These charts keep track of the unit quality. So some games in this system work with the idea of strength points, okay? In this game, it's battalion scale, which means every unit is one strength point. So Instead of having units just destroyed by losses, instead they take losses to their effectiveness, which will be recorded like that. And when you get replacement points, they increase the effectiveness of the unit. It all works very much the same, but it has some effects, I think, on the combat system. You also have a bunch of charts and tables, which is here, and that's where my sequence of play is in this game. Instead of in Summer Scroll, it's in the back of the actual booklet. Here it's on this system, the sequence, it's in the charts and tables. And again, a big pile of charts that you're going to be flipping through. This is less mechanically challenging than the naval game, though. And we'll go over the sequence in a little bit and try to capture some of the idea of the rules within that and some of my gripes at the same time, perhaps. Here you've got a full color representation of the counters and what everything means on them. This is kind of an issue in terms of you really do need this to understand what's going on. There's nothing like it in the rule book, so you're going to be referring to this to call things out. And it's not too hard. You have the same kind of concepts with the personality affecting combat there. And you also, well, you have a supply system, etc. The supply system with its operations points reminds me a lot of Kevin Zucker's operational games. That was the first thing I thought of when I saw this. This should be easy. It's kind of like Zucker's games. Well, yes and no. There's a lot of new concepts in this design. Here's a list of your different auxiliary icons, and they all have their own special tasks. Just like they did on the naval side, they're going to have them here, and we'll see them in play. Counters specifically to handle sieges. You also have some counters that you don't really need for the game. These suckers. There's no explanation of them. What they are, as far as I can tell, is they're for you to be able to use the advanced or optional combat system. There's a more detailed combat system where you actually have leaders aboard. You have more leaders assigned to units, and the actual formations are kind of applied against each other. I didn't want to download them. They're available for free for download, and the games come with support to allow you to use that system. I don't have a printer. So I kind of said, you know, this game is taking enough of a toll on me. I'm not going to play the most advanced, complicated version. And I don't think they really add a lot to the game. Both games, Summer Scroll and this, give kind of the hook of, hey, these would make good systems for playing your favorite tactical mini system within as well. And I think actually that's where these games might shine the best. That's more stuff for my review side of things. Okay, over here, you got your terrain effects chart, not attached to the map, its own little card. And honestly, I find this really, really hard to understand. So, for example, I got forests here, and I got woods up here. And I have a hard time telling the difference between the two. They both look like, you know, little brown things and little green things. The brown's a little darker in here and the green's a little lighter. What does that mean? I really don't know. I kind of figure the forest is more to the north. Maybe this is forest. Maybe it's not. I don't know. You know? And it may change during the game because I can't tell from this. There's also different sets of fortifications that it's hard for me to tell what it is that's important. I'm assuming it's the parenthesized bit here. Any green border. Okay, so anything I see with a green border is going to be a grade 0, but it's hard for me to tell green from black. Let me see if I can find something with a green border. So I think this is a green border. And this very clearly is a black border because it's not the green. But again, it could be possible that because the terrain is difficult to discern on this map, which is a pretty map, it looks like it's been done with a watercolor, or coloring pencils or something like that. There's something very kind of homey about it. Well, because of the difficulty of discerning that information, hey, a level 0 fortification may well become a grade 4 fort accidentally at some point in my game, and then it may switch back, or forests may become woods and stuff like that. That's one of the prices you pay for making things less discernible. Likewise, you know, these counters, they say who they are on this side, and I'm keeping them this way up, but it's very easy to get them mixed depending on your sorting or whatever, and you end up with Russian units in the Swedish pile, and it just causes some confusion, and you end up having to replace things. Yes, that's pretty minor. But I like to gripe. That's important here. You also have displays to hold your garrisons. Now, they have a space for a leader, but they don't get a leader assigned to them until a siege is actually accomplished, and they work the same way, also with spaces for auxiliary and artillery in each of these, along with these formations. Here it's kind of nice. They spell out what the capacity of each command is. I didn't go into that too much over on the summer scroll. That's an important concept that I kind of missed there. But yeah, here it's the type of column or army. You don't have grand armies in this that you have on the board that's able to determine how much force there can be in it. Garrisons and armies show up on the board kind of as hidden things. Now, that's a way of keeping your opponent from knowing what's going on, and you can kind of have notional garrisons which have no troops in them. I'm not quite clear from the rules. There's indications that maybe garrisons have strength points attached to them automatically, but I couldn't find any direct confirmation to that they just automatically have a strength point. That may be, see, the problem is the game's designed with a very broad, specific, broad general rules that discuss every game in the system as kind of, you know, well, there are special cases where this is the case. And then it doesn't really tell you, hey, in the exclusive rules, whether or not it is or isn't very well. So you're left with kind of this, I wish they had not told me about every single type of game in the system in the general rules. And there are a lot of cases where I feel like the rules are over-wordy and telling me too much and leaving me confused thereby. Okay, what else do you have? You have these, which are allowed, which are how you designate your target for an operation. You see, I already have one on the map, and that'll correspond with a marker up here, which indicates how many operational points you've committed to that operation. The game starts off with the Russians committed to one operation. The Russians have some choice as to what to pick there. Okay. I think that's covered most of the components here. And I think it's a good idea for me to pause and come back in a bit. Well, it turns out I have a little bit more free time than I thought, so let us take care of this. So let's start looking at the sequence of play here. And maybe we'll catch some of the stuff. Check for random events. Now, I haven't annotated this one yet. I want to go through the rules and put down things that are specific to a lesser wrath into this. But I haven't had a chance to do that yet. It's also kind of a pain in this one because the sequence of play is in the much paged through charts and tables book. So it might be a good idea to photocopy a copy of this because you're not getting a card or a sheet that's separate, or, well, you probably can't just cut it out. I can't. All right. So let's get my tail moved here because that's kind of a problem, and now I'm playing with the wire attached, so it's hurting my hand. First, you check for random events. This is in the exclusive rules. Well, what random events do we have in this game? And I may be catching things in the wrong order here because, again, it's not called out in the sequence of play that's included in the specific rules or charts for this game. Instead, it's just your generic sequence of play. So you got to kind of remember where things are. You've got things like the coup, and these are going to mirror what's going on in Summer Scroll. In fact, some of them use the same die roll and have essentially the same effect. Negotiation table you won't be using in here in the combined. That can increase the peace index. The peace index is important in this game because eventually it hits a point where the war is over. And at that point, you just are assessed for how well you did in following the orders that you've chosen. Okay, you have a little bit more choice in this game as to what orders you're going to follow. And it's kind of interesting in the 1741 scenario. I think the Swedes can just abandon everything and guarantee themselves a draw. Because there's no penalty to giving up territory in this game, which is kind of weird. Of course, if you're just playing the game for a draw, why are you playing it, right? You should at least attempt a victory. But there is a possibility of doing so. Of course, if you do try for a victory, even though you give up everything, you're probably not only going to fail, but you may actually lose some points in trying it, and then end up in trouble. So, we have this random events table, which I think you roll at the start of each operations phase, and you roll a percentile dice, and these are all going to be explained, I think, in the specific rule book rather than in the chart itself. All kinds of little flavor things that have a definite effect on the game. Then you determine initiative. Whoever has the most operations points gets to decide who goes first in that for the rest of the turn. And that'll be marked with this little initiative marker up there. Uh-oh, maybe I touched something. All right, I'm going to have to pause there. Trying to catch this in between moments, and I thought my alarm was going off there. Okay, so in determining the initiative, whoever has the most operations points gets to choose who's going to go first, and they flag that over there. There's 2 spaces on it, no reason for there to be 2 spaces. Again, there's a lot of places here where sort of the interface of the game seems a little sloppy, like maybe it's changed design ideas in midstream, less counters, something like that. There was no good reason to have 2 spaces there, but that was drawn up. A general weakness throughout this, both of the games presented, that there just isn't that much development work having been done. Things are in a sloppy sort of state. There may have been a rush to get it to printing, though. I know it ran a little late, about a month later than they expected. Okay, so you count up the operations points, and one person gets to choose who the first player will be. I'm not entirely certain where the advantage lies here. In general, the system seems to favor going second, so you'd almost always want to pick the other person to go first. But if you tie someone up in combat by moving first, it may be harder for them to get away. And depending on the optional rules you play with, there may be a significant advantage to going first. I tend to play with an option. The game initially was a simultaneous movement system, and that's been replaced. And again, it doesn't feel like that was completely hashed out. There may have been, playtesters who said, I don't like it with the simultaneous movement. Go on, I want something else. Anyway, determine initial weather. There's going to be a weather table somewhere here. And again, you got to flip through the page all the time. This is the wrong book, isn't it? Ice table. No. So that affects the ice. The way the weather is determined is over here. You'll be rolling here based on the season. Each turn has its own special weather chart, which determines one of these. And the base effect is dry, but some of the others have certain effects on the play of the game that'll just come into play when you do that. I don't know if that's when the ice table is used. It may be. That would be an exclusive rule. See, I actually marked Naval War here, so I bet you the ice table is checked there, but it may only be checked quarterly. Let's see. The ice table here's a little different. When you play the combined game, you don't play with this ice table. You play with the Summer Scrawl one, but you'll notice something interesting. This game covers this area of the board, and there aren't a lot of regions in it. There's just A and B. A freezes along with A in Summer Scrawl, and that will correspond with this sea area up here. The rest of the sea area in A Lesser Wrath is built up on, is all within kind of area B. So when B freezes on Summer Scrawl, these will slowly freeze one per impulse. That's going to be a little different feeling from what you get in the ice table in A Lesser Wrath. which actually can allow certain areas here to remain ice-free even when others stay frozen for a while. All right, now I've got to do an upload. Okay, let's see where we are here. I was at the weather. This is also the time when you worry about, and I penciled something in, the naval war and how it proceeds. Now, the way this is handled, and this isn't going to be a factor in my game. I'm going to move this over here where I've got some clear space. Let's see. We flip through the charts looking for it. We're going to have a little naval war table. It's just rolling a die and seeing whether or not the Swedes, Moscow, well, the Russians, or whether it's contested. If something's contested, it means you can both players can pretty much conduct naval operations in it. But if it's under one player's control, the other player is restricted. And there's penalties on, or modifiers on here based on random events, other effects in the game all come about. It's going to be kind of random though, and you flag them with these little things. Now, this affects the ground game. Just trying to see if I can get all my pieces back where they belong. I kind of ran them off the board. It can have a significant effect on what you can do and the support you have for your operations, but for the most part, this is a land game, and they're just a modifier to what you're doing in terms of sieges and maybe some ground combat. Now, playing it with the combined game here, you're not going to be using that table. Instead, the results over on Summer Scrawl effectively generate the kinds of advantages that you'd get off having the naval advantage over here on a Lesser Wrath. Now, let's take the pipe out of my mouth so I can speak. Now we go to the actual operational impulses. Now this is going to be a much less tedious play. You're not playing with some kind of movement point increments here where each unit is moving simultaneously or semi-simultaneously. In this game, instead, you're going to be using your normal movement point actions, and the initiative player moves, well, the person who's been forced to go first by the initiative player moves all his pieces first, and then the other player moves his pieces. What's kind of weird about this is that the way the rules are intended at this point to be played, and this has been apparently a developing concept of how this game is actually to be played. The person who goes second has the ability to leave hexes or dots or whatever that the person who went first moved into, but he has to make a die roll to do that, to disengage from that situation. There's an optional rule which I kind of like here, which makes it more of an I go, you go type game, because the original design was both players move their pieces in alternating fashion. You pick a piece, you move it, the other guy picks a piece and moves it. I'm sure that led to some really kind of annoying situations, just in terms of somebody delaying moving a piece, having too many pieces on the board to try to gain an advantage, that were creating unrealistic situations there. And that's why that probably moved away. But anyway, there's also the option to play the game as an I go, you go, where if you move into a space, you get to attack the other guy. I'm not sure which I prefer. I played it in my trial version, letting a person attack at the end of their phase, essentially. So essentially, you're allowed to activate a formation and conduct a siege, or move the unit, or do an auxiliary operation. Now, you have a limitation on auxiliary operations because you don't have a grand army here. You're only allowed to do 2 auxiliary operations during each of your impulses. You'll get, like with Summer Scrawl, and they match up completely right, 4 impulses to operate. Now, the way it's supposed to be handled is both players take their operations, which include sieges, and then you resolve any battles with anything that's left over. That means the person who goes second really has the opportunity to bring the battles. The other person going first, well, the opponent can almost always, or can often withdraw from battle. What are ACs? Yeah, there's a real tendency in these rules to use a lot of abbreviations, and it's hard to remember them. You're going to be constantly doing, if you're like me, lookups throughout the game because you will never remember what they stand for. AC, I think, is an attack campaign in this set of rules, which means you have a campaign like this one over here where the Russians intend to take this space. And that's kind of the core of how you're going to get your prestige in this game. So ACs may occur. No, that's probably attrition check. I'm sorry. OC is an offensive campaign. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so when you move, essentially in this one, you're always going to be checking attrition. Attrition over in Summer Scrawl isn't as often. Generally, you get charged, you take damage at the end of every turn. And you also take damage if you move through bad weather. But in this game, see if we can find the attrition table, you're going to be using this operational movement table. And what you do is you compare your movement allowance to the number of movement points you actually spend. Now you'll notice something interesting. If I have a movement allowance of 4, what? It goes out to 8? Well, that's because you're allowed to spend double your movement allowance to move. You essentially have double your movement allowance to actually act on the board. And I have the feeling that from what I can see from the rules, this is also a evolving design here. This one works pretty well, except for the slight confusion of, oh, hey, how come I got double my movement points? Nah, that's no big deal. And you'll be getting a modifier there, which is the number of rows you get moved here. You essentially roll a die on here, apply the modifier, and you have a lot of other modifiers in place. One of the key ones is how many operations points that you have stored in your hub. And that'll be marked up here in your free operations points, not applied to that campaign. The number of free operations points, or loose ones, or whatever you want to call them, that you have available can affect your attrition checks, and you'll see they're here for each unassigned operations point, maximum of 4. Well, if you're really close to your hub, they each subtract 1 column off. You're only allowed to do that, though, if there's forage available in your area, strangely enough. If there's no food in the area, no matter what, you're going to start being affected by supply issues here. Well, you're going to be more affected by them. And you have these forage depleted and forage depleted -2. Now, in this game, the best forage that there is depleted. So, no forage is what's present in the worst terrain, whatever that is. Things like that deep woods, if that's what that is, as opposed to this. The swamps, I think also the wooded swamps are not good places to be. So you won't get this option if you're in fully depleted terrain. If you're in partially depleted terrain, geez, I don't remember what the effect of that is. I don't remember what that does. Yeah. Well, I'll show you how this is going to be as I play through it, because I'm going to be flipping through these rules continuously, looking for that. Now, luckily, there's a nice index here, or whatever you want to call it. There's no real index in the back. There's just this. So what I'm going to look for is attrition somewhere. That'll be perhaps under supply. And we look here, say 31. foraging. Okay. See if we can find the effect of anything here. It increases the range to the nearest hub. So if your forage depleted, the range increases by 1 for forage depleted and 2 for forage exhausted. Now, range is important. I thought it completely canceled it out for forage exhausted. So what's important here is how close you are to the hub, right? That can be extended through the use of depots, which I have some here. And you also need a hub or depot within short range of you to perform a siege. So you kind of have to build these depots near where you're campaigning anyhow. There isn't one for the Russians up here, unless I screwed up and didn't deploy one. There may be that there's supposed to be one up here. I don't know. And I don't know who these guys are. Well, they're Russian, whatever they are. I don't know why they're not in a command, but I'll set them up somewhere. Anyway, these are going to give you bonus modifications to help how far, how much strength point loss you take. Now, the strength point loss, the percentage, that's kind of a misnomer in this game of the system because it uses the combat effectiveness. So you'll be losing levels of combat effectiveness. However, your percentage is based on your strength points. So if you have 5 units there and you take 10% losses, well, let's say you take 20% just to make it easier because I don't remember the rounding, but I think you take 1 at half. You'd lose a level of quality, okay? You don't lose 10% of your force or 20% of your force like you would in the non-battalion scale games. And we got some other modifiers here. I don't know what they are. The type of unit, you'll always be getting a bonus in this game from that. Modifiers by terrain. And your leader helps you or hinders you there. Also, if you have a huge unit, but that's not likely to happen, the weather, etc. If you're walking on ice, that's not good. That's forage exhausted. Okay. Okay, when all sides have passed in succession. So this is, again, not the current system. It's just stayed in there. The way it used to be, you'd be alternating. Well, that's no longer the case. I mean, you're alternating, but one person moves all their pieces, then the other one does. So that's kind of a little bit of something for errata to clean up. Ending the operations phase. If nobody's got a campaign plan, or if people refuse to take an operation. Again, this is kind of not been cleaned up for the new rules. Okay. Then you go to an administrative phase, and this is the same kind of design as in Summer Scala, where you get to do some cleanup and bookkeeping tasks here. And what you're going to do, check for strategic or special events, and I don't know which ones are the random and which are the strategic. I got to go through the book and mark this up because it's not going to tell me. And oh boy, do I not want to face reading the whole rules again to try to find these. I'm really pissed that I didn't do that while I was playing it. I was hoping to do that. But that's going to be painful. That caused a lot of problems, and cleaning that up and actually creating a usable sequence of play for Summer Scala helped a great deal, even though it was a more painful game overall. Check for political events, whatever those are. You know, again, geez, I don't know which fit under which one, and I'm going to have to look up every little chart in this book and mark them into there. Adjust the peace index. These can happen through the random events. It could also generate the end of the game through that. All right, campaign plans. So the first thing you do is see if you've succeeded in your campaign plans. And again, in this game, like in the other one, and let's see if we can find where they are. They're not in little cards on this one. They are instead built into this chart where each location on the map is indicated with a certain prestige value and whether or not it affects the peace index to take it. at different time periods, okay? And then recapturing it is also assessed there. Now, these only count if you had to do a siege to take the territory, which is why I'm saying the Swedes could just withdraw, since they're holding, you know, the territory that the Russians want, and they would not lose the game. They wouldn't win it either. But in the 1741 scenario, it looks like they can guarantee a draw. I'm not so sure in the full campaign what this would all mean. But you don't get a bonus. You declare a campaign. If the Swedes withdraw from here and you capture this, you don't get any bonus for it. You scared them away. You didn't win a battle. You don't gain any glory. It doesn't matter how well your country's doing in this game. It only matters how much glory you sort of assemble. And there's something kind of wanky in both these games about if you're playing in some kind of tournament or something, you can collect up that glory and buy ranks with it, which give you bonuses in all the games, so you get better at the game. Not because you learned anything about the game system, but because you have these little special abilities. They're kind of cute. They make more sense in, like, I don't know, a Down in Flames type game than in something like this. They just don't feel right here because you're being different people in different games, and you really shouldn't be able to carry those over, in my opinion. But they're supposedly marked just for fun, optional rule, and well, if that's somebody's idea of fun, I'm not going to take it away from them. Okay. So you check to see whether or not you succeeded in your campaign options. If you did succeed, like I said, that increases your prestige. If you fail at them, it decreases it. It may or may not affect your opponent's prestige. Somewhere in the rules it says, yeah, they're usually like, you know, if you get +1, your opponent gets -1. But in some cases, in the exclusive rules, maybe in all cases, I'm not sure, it seems to say, well, you have them, and since they're 1 each, God knows what you do, it looks like nothing happens. But it also affects this peace index track, which can end the game. And that's important because if you succeed in some campaigns and push the peace index at the same time, you're getting a bonus over your opponent, i.e. your prestige is going up. Maybe theirs is going down. Who knows? There's no half points to mark here. And at the same time, you're bringing the end of the game closer. So that's kind of a nice combination to do. Okay. Then you get to do supply activities. Well, first of all, you might have to do conduct any required administrative phase ACs, attrition checks. If you're big, if you're sieging, both sides take it. If somebody sent an auxiliary to cause you to desert, I don't think there are any of those in this game. Speaking of left out things, so there's these priest auxiliaries kicking around somewhere here. Let's see if I have one. Here's one, and that's what they wear, a little cassock. Unfortunately, it says that they affect the combat results. I can't find what effect they have. Again, there are a number of instances like this where the game just is not complete. It has not gone through the proper development that you'd expect from a major company. So, you know, it's kind of a, well, do you want to make up your own rules, or do you want to ignore these things, or what do you want to do? I kind of ignored them because I couldn't figure out how to handle these things with a balanced method in the case of the priests. I just couldn't figure out how they work into the combat. We'll go to the combat in a moment. I know I handled it for Summer Scroll, but I need a new video for that. Movement. Okay. So let's see. Over here, trace valid lines of communications between depots and hubs. Otherwise, your depots may deteriorate. Then you're allowed an administrative movement phase, where you're allowed to move rather rapidly outside of your formations as long as you stay away from the enemy. I didn't see any of that happening, but certainly if there's like a Swedish pullback, that's going to happen during that. And if the Russians want to advance through it, that's going to happen during that. Your main thing is you just can't, well, you can't capture stuff with it, and you can't come close to the enemy. All right, we're going to have to mark where we are so that we can continue. We're going to get to the redeployment. Okay, to continue. And the camera's not so bad right now. It doesn't actually eat memory. It was that it comes with a default set on demo mode. Meant to be used in the store. Yeah, that's nice. Leave it up to the people who've already bought it to suffer problems. Don't make it run out of battery life when it's sitting on the store. Or use extra power or whatever it is. Okay. So what do we do now here? So after the administrative movement, we go to a redeployment and reorganization. Now this is where you're allowed to kind of shift your forces between headquarters, create new headquarters, stuff like this. This is also, like in Summer Scralla, going to allow you to do this right after a battle, but it's more limited there. Here you're also able to take reinforcements. Now these, I need to put the specific rules in for this, but these essentially are an accumulation of reinforcements. Well, reinforcements are set by the scenario. And over with the Swedes, they roll a die and get to bring units out of their box here, and it just don't look like there's many there. And then also more units show up. Now, here's the thing. In the scenario, it doesn't it specifies when the Swedes show up. But there's a huge pile of Russians here that never show up, including the guards, which incidentally have specific rules which only apply to the 1741 scenario, but are not set up in the 1741 scenario, and there is no reinforcement rules for them in it. I don't know what to do with them, but maybe they're at St. Petersburg. But they get recalled from St. Petersburg if a coup happens. Well, that can only happen in that scenario, and there are no rules for them being in the game in that scenario. And it's just, again, this lack of development work on it. Clean this thing up, and maybe there's something worthwhile in here. But it's certainly not a finished product that you're buying. You're buying a work in progress. It's not just that you have to tape things together. It's not just that maybe you have to print the game out. But you also have to really extrapolate and try to guess what the rules are going to be. And I'll work on that as I go, maybe, or decide, hey, I don't need that rule. That's fine. Because obviously the designer seems to have thought, I don't need that rule. That's fine. Maybe it didn't fit. Maybe it got deleted accidentally. Who knows? Anyway, a whole pile of Russian units that obviously are meant for the game, and there is no indication of when they come in. I'm going to do the same as the Swedish rule, which is they all show up at the beginning of 1742, and that may skew things. It may not. We'll see. We'll do the playthrough. That's often how you find out if a game's any good or not. I didn't play the 1742 part of it. I just played until the end of 41, the initial scenario for the ALW game. You're also allowed to relieve leaders and put new leaders in place. You go through a process kind of like in Summer Scralla, where you roll for your auxiliary units with their pretty little uniforms that mean you can't tell what you got. That's sort of like this vague form of a fog of war, right? You might recognize what the formation is likely to be by its uniform, if it's face up, but it does kind of hide what it is. In the case of a priest, it's pretty clear what you've got there, but in terms of some of the others, it may not be. And those are handled over here. You shouldn't be looking at your opponent's track anyhow, though. Those should be kind of hidden behind a screen, I think. Okay. So, you're allowed to transfer strength points between units. Well, not in this game. And you can do a strategic redeployment, whatever that is. I don't know how that's different from the strategic movement. Okay, final steps. Okay, so here you also check to see if fortifications surrender and whether or not depots are reduced. You'll also get a roll to see if you get additional operations points. Now, if you're not doing anything in the game, your operations points actually increase at a better rate. But if you have any kind of campaign going on, they do not. And we flip through the rules to look for where the operations points are. And the rules are not a scrambled, or the charts are not a scrambled mess. They are organized kind of nicely, so it's easier. But I only have one hand, so it's kind of hard to see these. But I'm getting into the operations section, so I know I'm going to find it soon. Here's how auxiliaries recover. Again, listed by different types. Of course, here's leader personality, which is kind of at random there. And here we get to auxiliary tasks, But now here we are, operations points. Let's see, maybe this is where we get it. This is what costs you operations points. No, doesn't look like, oh, there it is. Potential gains, when you disband depots or capture a city, you get it, but then there's this ops generation table, and that's actually what I'm looking for. It's up here. You make a roll on this and see how many ops you get each turn, and the big modifier here is, do you have some kind of campaign in progress? And that includes a defensive campaign, which means even if you're just defending yourself against your opponent, if you want to be able to move any pieces, you're less likely to get any operations points, and therefore be less likely to be able to start a new operation. So if you're playing defense, well, you may be in a position, or moving pieces, or doing anything you want to do, you may be in a position where you're not going to be able to do a counter thrust as easily as if you just sit there and let your opponent come on to you. Then you can build up forces and build up the supply and organizational power to be able to strike back. That's kind of the concept there, and it, I think, works kind of interestingly. And you have the same kind of thing, I think, in the Zucker games, where if you do nothing, you start accumulating points, but if you do stuff, you spend them. Well, you don't spend them as much in this, so this kind of covers that aspect. And forage can also be restored or degraded. Okay. What about battles? So, battles in this game, you got to follow this chart, and I found myself needing to do this in the rule book itself because I'm going to be flipping back and forth from here, but I'm going to show you just how annoying it is because I like doing that. So the first thing is you define who's in the battle, and that's kind of the first guys who show up at it. Then you check for surprise. Now we flip through there. Yep. That's going to happen a lot where counters get flipped around because I've got to page through these rules all the time. Now there's going to be a surprise chart here, which looks pretty simple, but there's modifications due to the personality of the leaders. Remember how that works from Summer Scala, as well as the terrain. Now you roll one die, and only one person can be surprised, but the modifiers apply to both players' die rolls, and then the terrain for the leaders, and then the terrain modifiers are kind of an inverse. So the attacker is affected one way by Woods Hill Mountain, whereas the defender is affected in the other direction by it, making it easier to defend than to attack. Okay. Now, this is a complex procedure, and I haven't done it in a little while, so it's hard to remember. After that, you declare how many total strength points you have engaged in the battle. You can attempt to decline the battle. You make a leadership check to do this. Leadership is, well, we got to look on the chart and see on the piece. Whoops, there go my rolls. Okay. So the leadership rating is this first number here, and basically you have to roll under it on a 10-sided die. If you succeed in doing that, you can pull out of the battle and, hey, nothing happens. Well, you get the retreat rules, which I don't remember either. Okay. After the battle is going to happen, you can prevaricate, which is making leadership checks to try to bring additional forces into play. Basically, you are waiting for your additional units that weren't the first units that you selected, to first formations that you selected, kind of join the battle so that you get more forces there. Now, after that, you reveal the strengths again, and you also declare special types, and it says discount siege artillery, but I think the specific rules for this game actually allow siege artillery to have an effect in the battle. I don't remember. Okay, now here comes an important concept, the concept of frontage. The terrain in the game determines your frontage. Oops, I moved too quickly there, and I'm sure I blurred things. So we go to this terrain chart, and if you can tell what the terrain is, what you're going to get here is a little number. You get the amount of movement points that each thing costs, but you also have a frontage number. That's how many different wings can be involved in a battle. Now, what is a wing, you might say? Well, you have to calculate that as part of this pre-battle action, in which case what you do is you just have this simple little chart that shows you how many strength points, remember that's units, you have, and that tells you how many wings you have. Well, what happens if you have too many wings? You can't deploy them all in the battle, the rest become reserves. But it gets further than that. So you're only really allowed to have as many wings as your opponent has. The rest go into reserve, unless your leadership is significantly better than them. And that may not be here. That may be just in the rule book itself, just how much better you have to be. Your leadership value has to be at least twice your opponent, which is hard to get. You really need a lousy opponent and a good leader to be able to put additional wings into the battle. Okay. So then, what do you do? Well, you look back at the sequence of play for the battle to find out what you do next. And the next thing you do is you reveal strength again and again and again. Okay. The next thing you do is you erect the field works, which means basically if you have pioneers and sappers, you can use them to construct a defensive or an offensive field works that'll help you in the battle. Also, if you have certain leaders, the timid the cautious leader, who's not a penalty, but he's the good side of cautious, well, he allows you to build fortifications more easily. But basically, you need a certain amount of these auxiliaries or a cautious leader and maybe some auxiliaries. You need them to cover the amount of wings you have. Each auxiliary and the cautious leader count for, I think it's like 4 wings. So if you have 4 wings or less, you get that. And almost all battles will be small in this game. So basically, if you have anything, you get the field works, and they'll give you a benefit on the chart, on the combat chart. You determine cavalry superiority. That's going to be using this little thing here, and by different cav types, you get different multipliers to the amount of strength points you have there. Some do not count. For example, dragoons do not count because they're assumed to be fighting dismounted. And then you get a modifier here based on this. Now, if you have the advantage in odds, you get a minus. A minus is good here. That's going to increase the amount of damage you do to your opponent. At the same time, the opponent's also worried about their retreat threshold. So they combine. So what they're going to have to do is select a quality of unit that's going to be their foremost, their primary quality for what's on the table. Remember, the quality is the letters coming across here. Now, whatever quality you select, you have to have at least 20% of your army in that quality, which means since there's only 5 qualities, you will always have at least one that's of that type. I kind of worried about that a little bit. And that one's going to take the most losses. But that also determines your retreat threshold. You combine that, you compare that to the amount of wings that you have total, including reserves, and you find out how many wings of damage, how many wings that get knocked out of combat there have to be before you get routed. Quite often battles will end up in a tie with both people hitting their limits there and having to withdraw. That was kind of jumping away. I don't know if that was in here. Yeah, that's down here actually. Okay, not that matters. Artillery superiority, you compare who has the majority artillery. That person's going to get a bonus on the combat table. And auxiliary superiority, you're allowed to commit auxiliaries to the battle at this point by, remember, the same way as you do with the naval game, pulling them off your auxiliary box, committing them, and then they'll go into the recovery box where you may get them back in some late, well, you will get them back probably at some later turn. But you won't have them right away is basically the important thing. Now, we already talked about the leading CE and the retreat thresholds and how you determine those. Now you actually fight the battle, and this is going to be done in a number of rounds. And essentially what you do is over here you also get a modifier based on the LCE, the leading combat effectiveness. So if I picked a B and you picked a D, well, I would be getting a -2 to my die roll, and you would not be getting any modifier to your die roll. It's all one die roll though, right? No, each player rolls a die separately, sorry. You also have a leadership matrix, which determines based on the type of leaders, how aggressive they are. That affects what they're going to have. You put these all in with all these effects, and they all work in here. You also get a modifier. If the opponent has field works, you get boned with a +2. If the opponent screens, these are the auxiliary things. The auxiliary, whoever puts the most grenadiers into the battle gets a bonus. Whoever puts the most screening hands off a penalty. You then also have row shifts from this. your opponent's LCE, their combat effectiveness that they chose for their lead unit, will perhaps cause you to cause less damage to them. And then you look at how many wings you have compared, you make your roll of the die, you apply your row shifts, and you do an amount of, I think it's casualties and then wings that have been knocked out of combat. So for example, if you rolled here, you would cause 3 units to lose a level of combat effectiveness, and 2 whole wings are knocked out of the battle. What does that mean that those wings are out of the battle? Not a whole hell of a lot, except that there's this retreat threshold. And there's also the fact that you can only have, okay, there is an effect. Wings that are not in the battle don't get to count anymore, but you get to bring your reserves in. So if you weren't allowed enough wings in the battle, that usually happens. But what usually happens is there's only a couple of wings in the battle anyway, and both people break and run away. All right. Now, if the first round doesn't resolve things, players have a chance to try to withdraw from the battle. If they remain, they just keep fighting with whatever number of wings that they have, but their base number of wings that they have engaged remains the same, assuming they have enough active wings. After the battle, you're going to be using a leader loss table. And if somebody doesn't withdraw, there's a possibility that it's a major battle that somebody gets prestige off. This is really unlikely. You have to be outnumbered, and it has to have like 40 strength points, which few battles do. The bigger ones will. And there's if you succeed in that, you get a victory point. However, if somebody has their captain general, which I guess is supposed to represent them in the battle, well, a victory point's at stake no matter what. There's also the possibility of a rout, which can multiply the effect of the victory point if there is a victor, but I didn't see one that had a victor yet. And then there's a pursuit check, which will be conducted there, and we'll flip through the book to get to that. And yes, this is as annoying as it looks to deal with this thing. Okay, so in order to do the pursuit, you have a bunch of modifiers here, and you'll be making a roll to see how much damage you do to your opponent. We didn't see one of these because everybody got pushed aside in every battle, so I don't know quite how well it does. But it's based on a number of strength points and then damage to specific types of things. Artillery, infantry, leaders, well, L's, yeah, leaders, cav, whatever, is all taken there. Now, there's more. Now, surprise affects a few things, like you can't construct field works if you're surprised, and you can't withdraw from the battle if you're surprised. Checking to see how much time I have, and it looks like very, very little. Okay. Well, then here's your leader loss table, and essentially that's kind of random, and it can affect leaders who aren't on the field. I.e., where they are is over in the officer's mess, and that gives them the possibility to still be wounded, because that just indicates that they're commanding units somewhere. They're just not in overall command of a formation. So there's some chance that they get wounded or killed based on this. And if your commanding leaders get wounded, well, some other leaders may be promoted to take their place. All right. Well, I'm going to have to come back after a little bit, but there's a reorganization after combat that allows you to, again, do some of that administrative capability to make sure your units are all in existence, or if they're not in existence, that they move their actual troops into the formations that are being disbanded at that point. All right, more later. Okay, since a lot of this the concept of the design of this game, and we're actually over here on the Alessa Wrath, is about the specifics of the situation. And it really goes into a lot of depth, handling a lot of special case type stuff. I do want to discuss that a little bit, since I couldn't discuss much of it because I haven't added those parts to my sequence of play yet, and I kind of glossed over them. I want to touch over this, looking a little bit at the index here, just to talk about what we've got here. What are major things in this place? First of all, the terrain is hell over here. It really is. It's very difficult to operate in. It's the forage is reduced, which means you're going to be taking more attrition in general. Let's see. Both systems, the Summer Scala and the Lesser Wrath, well, both of the base systems are very heavily based on this concept of auxiliaries. You're going to be constantly, a lot of the stuff that you want to do is going to be sort of that little war type concept that is certainly familiar to followers of either the War of Austrian Succession or the 7 Years' War, because Austria was so good at that. Well, here it's really highlighted in the whole system with these, special little attachments that you bring to your units that are going to give you that advantage. Now, you're limited to how many you can carry with each unit. I don't remember what the limitation is. I think it's something like 2 counters per 10 strength points. That's not clearly defined in the rules of the base game. I've said that a lot of times, haven't I? What I do is every fraction of 10 strength points you can carry 2. That's especially important because an army can only carry 15 strength points in this game, and a column can only carry 5, which means if you had to match that 10 strength points to have any auxiliaries, you wouldn't have any at all. Of course, perhaps you could do it with a fractional accounting where, hey, I've got half of that 10, but that seems unlikely to be what the author intended here. I think it works a lot better, and there are quite a few of these, so you wouldn't get to use many of them if you couldn't allocate them a little bit more lavishly than you can. Of course, you can also put them over here into the garrisons, and they can help you under those conditions. In fact, as a siege starts, I haven't even discussed sieges. Sieges are very, very handled in great detail. As a siege starts, you can toss the necessary auxiliaries in. You don't have to plan for that, which is kind of a nice little thing, if I recall correctly. I may be mistaken. I may be mistaken about a lot of things. I have a lot of trouble holding the rules to this game in my head. Again, I've said that before. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. We'll touch on the integration system to the game. So one of the factors in this is, well, there's 2 succession crises going on. One is the Empress Anna. I'm not going to go into the whole Romanov dynastic issues at this point, but let's just suffice to say that things are very complicated. Empress Anna is disturbing the future Tsarina, well, not known to be, but anyway, the Princess Elisabetta. And she's getting very upset, and that's what this war starts over, okay? The Swedes contacted Elisabetta and told her, hey, maybe we can help install you. So the story of the whole war is essentially the Swedes think that they're going to get some territorial concessions for aiding Elizabeth to the throne. And they start this war. After an initial defeat, they do march down towards St. Petersburg to aid the coup. But they don't make it. They get lost in the snow somewhere around here. And Elizabeth actually is supported by the Guards regiments, the ones that aren't deployed in the game, although there are rules for them, and they never show up. Again, although there are rules for how to handle them during this coup, which can only happen in 1741. And essentially, she rises to the throne on her own. Diplomatically, she goes back and says, hey, I'll tell you what, we'll go to peace, and we'll pay your campaign expenses. And Sweden doesn't want this. They have some specific interests. In particular, they want Kexholm, which is where these guys should be. not New XII over here. And the war just continues because the peace was unacceptable, and Elizabeth basically takes a policy of anti-foreigners, which includes anti-Swede, and, well, you have 3 years of kind of pointless war in which the Swedes lose some more territory in Finland and really wish that they hadn't gotten here. And one of the factors to that is the political side of things. Now, that political side is baked into this with that hats versus caps thing. And in fact, on the military, on the land game, it's better to have the pacifists in charge because they're more willing to add troops. But over on the naval game, the hats, the more aggressive factor, the one who started this war, actually give you an advantage to getting naval forces, for whatever that all works out to. You're more likely to have the hats in charge at any given time. The caps were very, very weak. But this is the other thing. There's going to be a succession crisis in Sweden because, geez, now I don't remember. We've got an imported Swedish king, Frederick, I think, who needs to name his successor. And there are several choices, one of which is Elizabeth's choice for the heir to Russia. And if you slip him in early enough, you actually get some advantages that way, which can happen if the coup happens. It can happen if the succession crisis boils over before the coup happens. But if the coup happens, well, if Elizabeth wins the coup, you will no longer be able to put Peter III on the throne of Sweden. If, on the other hand, there are other options. The historical option was Peter's guardian, whom the Russians support, and that'll help your peace with the Russians. Not necessarily help the player at all. It'll just help the conditions of the peace, which might be good overall, but there's another option, which is the Danish prince, the Crown Prince of Denmark, could be nominated. And if that happens, that pisses Russia off, but it precludes Denmark going to war with Sweden, which they historically sort of staged some activity against Sweden. I don't think they actually declared war. The Russian army historically went into Stockholm to defend it from the Danes and any attempt to really take things over there at Sweden's request. You also have, there are other options here. I don't remember them all. But basically, it comes down to a die roll. And that can affect the whole tenor of the campaign, especially over on the Sommerskala map. Now, let's see what else we have here. We have that option of the Northern Front, which is basically a point-to-point movement working through here. And we won't talk too much about that because I haven't played on it yet. That likely comes in late in the game, if anywhere. On both maps, Russian doctrine and fear of Sweden is in play, which is to say that the Russians can't attack unless they have a significant advantage in odds. I think it's 4-3 in both maps, but I'm not sure. That's both naval and land. However, they can make a leadership check and attack at worse odds. Likewise, on the land situation, the Russians have an advantage defending. They always were good at defense. They solid troops, but not terribly willing to launch an attack. On the other hand, the whole Swedish doctrine is involving attack, so they have a penalty on defense. So this kind of works out interestingly. The Russians have an advantage on defense. The Swedes have a penalty on defense. It really works out to hose Sweden no matter what they're doing, right? Over here, the Russians have to make a leadership check in order to attack, but the Swedes actually have to as well because their navy is not in good shape right now. Okay. Let's see. Let's look at the integration issues of the game. And this is essentially how you tie these two together. Now, this has some problems too. Most particularly, there's a reference, two integration points listed on the back of this booklet. Well, they ain't there. And I've looked through everything else and I can't find them. The tie-ins of what space on here reflects to what space on here, how that all works out. I'm just going to have to guess that. It's not included in the game as far as I can see. If I'm wrong, I'll find, I'll mention that I found it somewhere because it may be hidden somewhere, but it very clearly is not on the back of this booklet because this booklet's not very big. Otherwise, this, well, you map the advances here on the land board over here onto the Lacey's campaign track, and that'll affect, this is a peace indicator. That's the biggest thing that affects there. Otherwise, you're just trying to map them. Now, there's some special rules for mapping them, and we won't go into too much detail there, but you're keeping track of it through that. Naval actions are taking place on here, but they have an effect on here, which is to say if convoys arrive at specific locations here, that means that troops are being debarked there. It can also support actions, etc., provide particular advantages, which were sort of abstractly represented by these little boat counters. Well, now they're going to have specific effects based on what you brought with you, whether you can bombard something or not. And then they give specifics about which table applies where, because the games usually share similar tables, but quite often you're going to be rolling a die and looking on both tables. In some cases it specifies, no, just use this one. In some cases it says roll a different die for each one, which is kind of weird if that happens, but it's because the tables aren't in complete alignment. They tried to do their best. You do have this option of the Danes coming into the game and making a further attack, and when that happens, as far as I can tell, both the Swedes and the Russians over here on the naval game, if that happens, you better hope this game's done. But the Swedes and the Russians can both kind of gain prestige for their naval game by opposing a common enemy. And there's rules actually for adding a third player for the Danes, just to take account into that. I know I haven't given a lot of detail on what's going on in the game. You aren't going to be able to capture a real feel for it through this. What I'm hoping to do, well, I know I'm going to be doing the playthrough. What I'm hoping to do is be able to highlight and zoom in on, say, some action that's going on the board, and I'll try to indicate the videos where maybe we're seeing the first instance of something. So the first land battle, the first siege. Like I said, I skipped this. I meant to talk about it a little bit. Sieges are handled in particular detail, where you're actually you have these options to slowly handle this approach to the siege of building your lines of circumvallation and such not. Did I pronounce that wrong? And then you have these options to launch an escalade or whatever at a particular time. There's a chance of them surrendering during the administrative phases. Options for offering honors of war. I always wonder about stuff like that in a two-player game, but in this game, because your goal isn't necessarily the strategic goal, there might be times when you want troops, but the other guy wants the territory, and it actually seems reasonable for the two players to come to an agreement based on that. I wonder, but we'll see. Quite often there are games, two-player games, that offer things like that, and you just sit there saying, wait, how is that going to work out? All right, so I hope you join me in at least some of the playthrough, and then come back for the overall discussion, because this is a game that actually covers something that no one covers. Obviously, the War of the Hats, who's going to cover that? But the system in general is filling a more exciting and interesting and relevant period to everyone in terms of covering some of that Austrian succession stuff, the Russo-Turkish wars in the era, just so many different things that are covered in that nobody else is doing these at an operational level. Very few tactical level battles, and almost nothing strategic covers this era. So I'm very interested in how this plays out, or I was, which is why I looked at it. Now, obviously, I've got some disappointments so far, but maybe now that I've gotten a little bit more feel for the game, it'll play a little more smoothly. I'll be looking through the rules less, and I'll have settled on answers to things that may or may not be correct, but at least will not be so painful to me or to you. All right, let's give this a shot.